Cool. Hi guys, welcome to week 3 of Tech and Medicine. My name is Allison, as you know. I'm a recent graduate from USC with a major in biology and minor in accounting, and I currently work as an MCAT content developer at Blueprint. And today I'd like to tell you guys a little bit about the MCAT and give you kind of a sense of what the MCAT is like. And as I go through these slides, please stop me at any time if you have any questions or concerns. This is really informal, and I hope it's somewhat interesting and helpful for you guys. Okay, so this is what our agenda looks like for today. So first of all, we'll go over the medical school application checklist, and this is in quotation because there's no real or official checklist to getting into medical school. Obviously, it's just a general list of things that pre-med students do to become their applicant. And then next we'll go over sort of what really is the MCAT. We'll look at the test and design, section breakdown, the scoring, and sample questions. And we'll also kind of look at how students normally prepare for the MCAT. So we'll look at 2 common preparation timelines and how for each case students would study differently. And I will also kind of discuss my personal favorite tools during my MCAT prep. Yeah, so before we go into this checklist, does anyone have an idea on what goes on this list? Like what do students do to kind of boost their application for medical school? You can drop it in the chat if you guys have an idea.
The MCAT?
Yeah, MCAT, obviously. Yeah, I mean, if you guys don't really know, that's totally fine too. Obviously, you guys are in high school. You guys shouldn't be worrying about these things. So first of all, we need, obviously, a passion for medicine. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. And we also need to take some of the prereq classes that some medical schools require. Not all medical schools require that you take certain classes, but most do at least recommend that you take a year of general biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, and stuff like that. You probably heard of that as well. And you also need to work on getting hands-on clinical and non-clinical volunteer work. Physician shadowing is highly recommended. Research as well. Letters of rec it's required by many medical schools. And last but not least, we have the MCAT. So the MCAT is really a significant factor when it comes to medical school admissions, and we'll sort of learn more about what MCAT is really all about in the next slides. So what is the MCAT? So this graph seems a little intimidating, but this is what just the schedule looks like for the actual test day. So the MCAT exam is 7 hours and 30 minutes total, and this is the total seating time, which includes times for check-ins and breaks. The actual testing time is just over 6 hours long, and for almost every student, the MCAT is probably the longest test that they've ever taken. You can see that each section has 53 or 59 questions each, with 10-minute and 30-minute breaks in between. And each section is also 90 to 95 minutes. And yeah, we'll go over individual sections that you can see here more in the next slide. And some of you may also ask, how many times can we really take the MCAT? So you're technically allowed to take it up to 3 times a year or up to 7 times in a lifetime, I believe. But you guys might think that may sound kind of limiting. It's oh, that sucks, I want to take it more. But in reality, this really isn't a limitation, as most students don't really take more than 2 or 3 exams in a lifetime. And that's because it's an extremely, I would say, daunting and high stakes and an expensive exam. Also, I think it's $300 something just to register for it, and you also need to buy prep materials, which costs a lot of money as well. And I wouldn't say compared to the ACT and SAT, where you can decide to take it multiple times more easily. It's really not like that with the MCAT. Yeah. So this is the section breakdown. This is sort of the meat of the MCAT. So the MCAT, as you can see, consists of 4 sections. The first section, as you can see, is chemical and physical foundations of biological systems. That's a very long name. I'm just going to call it CP. And as the name suggests, it mainly tests you on chemistry and physics. And this also includes topics in organic chemistry as well. So next is BB. And as the name suggests, it mainly tests on biology and biochemistry. And many of you guys may think, since, the majority of pre-med students major in biology, this section is probably the easiest out of all. But I like to mention that the relative difficulty and the level of knowledge you need to know for this section is a lot higher than the other sections, I think. For example, like the physics and the psychology topics that are tested on the MCAT will be more relatively surface level and less difficult. And students take, I would say, at least a year of general biology courses before taking this test. And it's also recommended that they take a semester of biochemistry if they can, but that's obviously not required. Next is CARS. This MCAT section will sort of ask you to read basically passages and answer questions to kind of demonstrate your critical thinking abilities. I would say all these passages are pretty complex, and it will be based on topics in social sciences and humanities, including concepts from cultural studies, population health, ethics, and philosophy. And that's just some of it. There's a lot more than that. And it's sort of like the critical reading section from the SAT, except that the MCAT CARS is, I would say, a lot less formulaic and less clear. And this section is probably the least favorite for most test takers, as it's relatively difficult to improve your score quickly during prep. To give you sort of an example of how obscure this section was for me, at least, I remember I worked my butt off for CARS every day for hours, and unfortunately my score actually it's just started decreasing the harder I tried, and I was just kind of losing my mind. And at one point it got down to a 48th percentile, and I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna stop this. And I actually never touched on CARS again until obviously the test day. And on the actual test day, I miraculously scored a 98th percentile on CARS. So yeah, that just tells you it's a little, like, MCAT is kind of really unpredictable at times. Yeah, I'm not trying to encourage you guys to just give up when you guys don't do as well you think, but you guys should try to be flexible in your approach and take breaks when you need it. And last but not least,
question.
Yeah, of course.
So the CARS it's not science passages? Are there any science passages?
No, CARS is just more social science and humanities passages. And yeah, it's basically questions based on that. Yeah, It's all, yeah. We have the psychology, the PS section. And this section tests you on psychology and sociology. And I would say that it's pretty memorization heavy, especially memorization heavy compared to other sections. And psychology and sociology aren't usually required for medical schools, and because of that, people don't really take it during college. And there will be a learning curve for students who didn't take those classes in college, and pre-med advisors, at least in my school, always encourage that the students take these classes. But for me, I didn't feel like taking it since I took AP psychology in high school, and I thought that was enough. And yeah, like, looking back, I don't think it was necessary for me to go out of my way and take all those classes. And this section was, I think, pretty doable with my AP psychology knowledge. Of course, there was a lot of new things I still needed to learn, like new terminologies, but it was overall fine. And yeah, I'd like to also mention that everything except CARS, except the CARS section, has both passage-based and discrete questions within a section. So what I mean by that is, for example, there will be a passage, and based on that passage, there will be around 4 to 7 questions based on the passage. Yeah, that sounds really repetitive. But these passages usually look like a portion of research paper or review article. I don't know if you guys ever taken a chance to look at them, but yeah. I would say that if you've had no previous research experience before going into MCAT, there will be a learning curve as well to trying to get through the language. Just like research language is something completely different, I would say. And yeah, and discrete questions are just your normal standalone questions, like with no passages, basically just normal, I would say just normal um, questions, standard questions that you can think of right now. So yeah, those two are what shows up in the CP, BB, and PS. Next, we'll go into how the MCAT is scored. So each of the 4 sections will be scored individually from 118 to 132 with a median score of 125. Now, I don't know why they picked those arbitrary numbers. I think it makes it really confusing. But these scores are combined to create a total score ranging from 472 to 528. That makes sense because, 132 times 4 is 528. And with a median score of 500. I mean, yeah, I guess the median score of 500 is pretty neat, actually. So maybe that's why. So the average MCAT score for matriculants to MD schools last year was MD schools in the U.S. Last year was 511.5, which is around the 85th percentile. However, I like to emphasize that MCAT score isn't everything. Admission committees holistically review applicants, and everyone has a different story. They have different strengths and weaknesses, and there's so much more than just the MCAT. Extracurriculars, GPA, personal statement, and there's a lot more to the medical squad application. And really, a good MCAT score will depend on the strength of the other pieces of the application, and also what school you plan on applying to is another important factor. Everyone has different goals. Some might be interested in going into MD schools, DO schools, or Caribbean schools. Like, to give you an example, I know a DO school in California called Western University of Health Sciences. They have an average MCAT score of 509, while a top 20 MD school, the NYU School of Medicine, they have MCAT score average of 522. So that kind of gives you a little reference. So yeah, a good MCAT score will also really depend on the school you intend to apply to. So yeah, you might even ask, like, why is this score even important? Like, what does it even reflect? Like, why does this even matter at the end, right? But medical schools really value these results because it's predictive of the student's USMLE performance later in medical school. So USMLE is like the medical licensing exam. So you need to pass and score well on all 3 of the USMLE exams during medical school in order to match into a competitive residency. And yeah, and it's also exciting because it kind of levels the playing field for applicants, basically.
So you mentioned stuff like DO and Caribbean. What are those things?
In order to become a doctor, there are kind of different paths you can take in terms of education. So you can apply to US MD schools. There are also US DO schools. They're a different degree, but they kind of do the same typical jobs as the MDs do. And yeah, Caribbean schools are still MD schools, but they're when the applicants apply during residency, they're considered different than US MD applicants. So they might have a considerable disadvantage when they apply to residency and matching. So yeah, those are just surface level kind of information, but if you definitely want to know more, I can let you know later through email. Yes. I think I'll move on to the next slide if there's no other questions. So yeah, this is the sample question. This question would likely show up in the biology section of the exam, and I'll give you guys a minute to read the question. And If you guys feel like you have an idea of what the answer is, please drop it in the chat. I'd love to hear it. And if you guys don't really know and you guys have no idea, that's totally okay too. You can just guess a random answer too if you're not sure. And yeah, and I'll just give you guys a minute to just kind of look over and give your prediction. Maybe 10 more seconds and then I'll move on. Okay, Michael answered D. So actually the answer here is C. I won't go into too much detail on why it's correct, but basically cytokines are secreted by the cells of the immune system, such as macrophages, and both allergic diseases and HIV result from the defects in the immune system. Muscular dystrophy is basically loss of muscle mass and weakness. And that's the least related to what we're talking about here. And if you're actually curious and want to take a deeper look into what real MCAT questions look like in all sections, I suggest that you check out the free AMC official MCAT prep resources online. Yeah, I think they have some of the free resources out there. Not all of them are free though. Yeah, that was C. Next, we'll move on to how students prepare for the MCAT. So now before we go on to these two timelines, I'd like to tell you that most traditional applicants take their MCAT during their junior year of college. And by traditional, I mean that applicants who apply at the end of junior year hoping to matriculate right after college. And this is because students like to take the majority of their prereq classes before for medical school, such as biology, chemistry, and all that before the MCAT. And let me just show the first one. So people who study during school or full-time, or people who have full-time jobs typically spend around, I would say, like 3 to 5 hours a day. And for people who study over the summer, study around 7 to 8 hours a day. Well, now let's actually go over the actual timeline. So you can see that for this first timeline, people spend around 5 months total to prepare for the MCAT. So around 5 months before test day, this is where students really begin studying like all the science content, stuff like memorizing amino acids, like learning all the organic chemistry functional groups and stuff like that. And students study a very wide range of subjects, topics. And this is where students also begin looking over the MCAT style questions and see how MCAT likes to test students and adjust their study methods based on the testing style and difficulty. And around 3 months before test day, I would say that this is where students really focus on just doing MCAT style practice questions and applying their content knowledge. Students also begin to work on practice full-length exams and also spaced repetition for content review. So spaced repetition is basically like a memorization technique where you literally just look over the content you reviewed already over and over again using flashcards or notes. And that's because there's so many things to memorize for the MCAT, and spaced repetition is something that most students need to do to retain all the information they need to know for the test day. And around 1 month before test day, this is where students really just solely focus on studying with the AMC official prep materials. And unlike any other test prep materials, this one isn't made by a third-party company. If you didn't know, AMC is the official organization that makes the actual MCAT. So, students save this for the last phase of studying because they obviously tend to be the most realistic and reliable source of MCAT preparation. And there's also a limited amount of study materials for this one, so they really like to save for the last phase. So preparing over the summer, this timeline is pretty much the same as the first one, except that we're on a severe time crunch. So we do everything in 3 months, except for instead of 5. And again, they would usually be spending around 7 to 8 hours a day studying. And also like to let you know that these timelines are just vague and general archetypes, and it shouldn't be seen as like a definitive guideline, as many people like to approach it differently with various strategies. And last, I like to finish off with my personal favorite tools for the MCAT. So for content review, I really liked using pre-made Quizlet and Anki sets from Reddit. And this may sound really weird to some of you guys, but the MCAT Reddit section actually has some really cool and really good and valuable free resources. And there are people who scored like extremely well, like 99th percentile, and have shared their extensive Quizlet or Anki sets that they've already made to study and memorize all the content and stuff like that. And this really saved a lot of time for me. And it's like I didn't have to make everything from scratch. It's already all made for me. And you guys probably haven't heard of Anki, but Anki is basically like a free flashcard tool where it automates the spaced repetition process for you. So for example, Anki will show you a certain set of flashcards on one day, and then again in 3 days, 3 days later, and then again like 6 days later. So it kind of like does a memorization process for you, and it's really neat. And a lot of pre-med students actually use that for the MCAT. Next is Khan Academy videos for the MCAT. So next, the Khan Academy, they actually have like a separate section of just MCAT prep videos, and I think that's really neat. And I found this especially helpful for physics and psychology and sociology, and I really liked it because for me, physics is really difficult, and it requires a lot of visualization for some concepts, and it made the most sense, I think, with these videos. I can see what they're drawing and stuff like that. And also for psychology and sociology, when I was learning a lot of like new terms and abstract concepts, it really helped me to just like listen to someone talk about it in depth rather than just reading like definitions from like a normal prep book, I would say. And I think what's great is that these are all completely free. I think that's kind of insane, honestly. But yeah, next is MCAT style practice questions. So for my first one, I would say I would definitely recommend the UWorld question bank. I feel a little guilty for not giving my company Blueprint a shout out here, but I gotta admit, I think UWorld still has the best question bank, hands down. They're really accurate and representative of the actual exam, and their explanations for each answer choices are, I think they're amazing. They have like really nice visual explanations and stuff like that. And all the questions are really well organized based on specific topics. So it made just organizing my study plan really easy, a lot more easier. But unfortunately, it is a bit pricey, but I found it really worth it. So yeah, next is the AMC official materials. So now these are obviously kind of a must-have for anyone taking the MCAT, as it is like the real deal. It's made by the actual test takers, and it's practice full-length exams give you a really good prediction of how you will actually score on the test day. So I think that's sort of a must-have for everyone. So last but not least, maintaining well-being. I think it's really important that students take really good care of themselves during the MCAT preparation. And for me, doing exercise, meditation, and eating good food really kept me sane throughout the process. And for exercise, it's kind of random, but I highly recommend a YouTube channel called MatFit, and it's a fitness channel with tons of short and fun like exercises for you to do. And what's great is that you can kind of like pop these in during your study break session and kind of feel sort of alive again, I would say. And for meditation, I really recommend an app called Headspace. It has a bunch of guided meditation sessions, and it's pretty affordable. And I would Also recommend doing this in your study break. And yeah, last but not least, I would often treat myself with good food, often with close friends or family. Whether that's just Postmates or going out. I think it was something that I really look forward to. And at the end of the day, I think it's important that you just make sure to leave room for personal time other than the MCAT, because it's really important that you stay motivated and avoid burnout. Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for showing up, and I wish you guys good luck on whatever path you decide to pursue. And please don't worry about the MCAT right now. Just focus on your high school stuff and kind of enjoy your freedom and youth. Yeah, and did you guys have any final questions for me?
Um,
Um,
we have a question from the chat. Arushi's asking, can you talk a little more about MD PhD programs?
Yeah, so MD PhD programs is just like a whole different kind of beast. So in terms of the MCAT, I would say that in order to apply to MD PhD programs, students who apply these programs tend to have a higher score on the MCAT. Um, it's such a like different field. I don't even know where to start, to be honest. Michael is an MD PhD applicant. Maybe he can give you some important insight about it.
Yeah, I think Allison's main point from the perspective of MCAT, it's definitely uh, you have to score a little bit higher, based on like the statistics and things like that. They're also looking for things more like research because, MD PhD is training you to become kind of a physician scientist. And so you'll be doing kind of bench work alongside your clinical work and things like that and seeing patients. And so they're looking for a lot more extensive research experience, usually at the cost of things like volunteer work and stuff like that. I would say that, I think volunteer work and kind of community outreach is a lot more important if you're applying for regular MD programs as opposed to MD PhD programs. If you guys have any questions as well, for MD PhD stuff, like offhand, I'm happy to, follow up over email as well. And I'm sure Allison as well. Yeah, so we have another question from May. So what made you decide to pursue an MD despite the intense process?
Yeah, this is a great question. I really had to answer this question myself like multiple times because like, looking at the process, it just seemed kind of impossible and it seemed like immensely stressful and stuff like that. But I think what really ultimately kept me going was knowing how like meaningful this job is at the end for me. For me, I really dream of kind of growing up. Um, Sorry, what am I saying? So I really want to be able to one day meet patients of all different kind of backgrounds and ages, and just kind of be able to transform their quality of life. I think that was like the one sole factor that really kept me going through this really harsh process. And yeah, I think Connor Connor also asked, would you recommend spreading your studying period out from 5 months to maybe 8 or to spend? Oh yeah, you can totally. Some people spread it out to a year, although maybe a year is too far of a stretch. But 8 months is totally fine too. Like it doesn't make it any less efficient. Maybe it's better for some people. It really depends on what kind of like study methods you use and what kind of person you are in terms of like how you study and stuff. But um, if you're okay with the only kind of downside may be that you might start to forget things, like some of the content, like for example, memorizing amino acids and stuff like that, that you really have to keep it up like often. Maybe that's like the only kind of downside, but other than that, that should be totally fine. Are there any steps? Michael asked, are there any steps that high school students can take now in order to better prepare themselves for success during undergrad? Yeah, so I would say just really focus on the science classes that you're taking right now in high school, and just try to do the best there. Because actually, when you get to college and the prerequisite classes you have to take, such as like biology and chemistry, all that, it really helps a lot if you really did well in during high school and like the high school AP science classes, because it's pretty similar, and I would say that if you do well on those, it should be a lot easier to do well in those classes and get a higher GPA. And also that relates to the MCAT because that content will be tested on the MCAT again. So yeah, I would really like to emphasize again, like please don't worry about like studying specifically for the MCAT. It's really not worth it. Just focus on smaller, more realistic goals in high school. Yeah. Maybe that's it for the questions. Does anyone have any other questions?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Allison. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.